A whisper of aged parchment, a rustle like dry leaves skittering across forgotten flagstones, was the truest music of my days. Here, in the hushed cavern of the archives, beneath the somber gaze of countless bound histories, I, UserCZ, moved with a reverence born of necessity and a quiet, burning devotion. Dust motes, dancing in the faint shafts of sunlight that pierced the grimy skylights, were my only companions, shimmering witnesses to my meticulous ritual. My fingers, calloused from countless hours of careful turning and cataloging, traced the brittle edges of a 16th-century missive, its ink faded to the color of weak tea. Each document, a fragile breath from a distant past, demanded not just handling but communion. I understood their silent narratives, the weight of their untold stories. Yet understanding did not pay the rent. The gnawing ache of overdue bills, a constant, low thrum beneath the surface of my scholarly calm, made every careful turn of a page a silent plea for providence. My passion, a solitary flame, struggled against the chilling drafts of modern financial realities. Today's task involved a collection of ecclesiastical decrees donated by a fading aristocratic line. Most were predictable, pious pronouncements, beautifully scripted but utterly devoid of practical interest beyond their historical context. I worked at my large oak table, its surface scarred by centuries of scholarly toil, my tools laid out like surgical instruments, fine brushes, a magnifying loupe, cotton gloves, and a soft, weighted snake to keep unruly pages still. The air, thick with the scent of old paper and beeswax, was a comfort, a familiar embrace. I picked up a particularly unassuming folio, its leather binding cracked and brittle, the gold tooling almost entirely worn away. It was labeled with an almost dismissive hand. Miscellaneous Records, Parish of St. Jude, 1588. My preliminary inspection, a routine practiced countless times, revealed nothing extraordinary. The script, a neat secretary hand, detailed tithes and minor disputes, the small anxieties of a long-dead village. But then my thumb brushed against a faint, almost imperceptible ridge along the inner spine. Not a warp in the parchment, nor a fold, but something deliberate. My brow furrowed. A tiny crease in the landscape of my concentration. My eyes, trained to spot the minutest anomaly, lingered. I brought the page closer, the loupe magnifying the fibrous texture of the paper, the delicate web of its imperfections. Nestled within the intricate floral border that framed the decree, where the artist had rendered a cluster of forget-me-nots and ivy, I saw it. A single, minuscule symbol, barely larger than a pinhead, woven into the pattern. It wasn't part of the conventional decorative motif. It was a stylized peregrine falcon, its wings outstretched, caught mid-descent. Its eye, a tiny dot, seemed to pierce through the centuries directly into mine. This was not an artist's flourish. This was an intrusion, a deliberate insertion. I reached for my UV lamp, its cool, violet glow bathing the page. Under its spectral light, the falcon shimmered with a faint, almost ghostly luminescence, its outline sharper, more defined. And then, as I adjusted the angle, a faint, almost invisible line became apparent, extending from the falcon's talon, a hairline fracture in the parchment surface, leading subtly into the decorative scrollwork. My heart began a slow, deliberate drum against my ribs. I followed the line with my eye, my breath held. It wound its way through the foliage, a nearly invisible thread, until it connected with another symbol. A tiny, stylized compass rose, its needle pointing not north but subtly west. Then another, a sunburst with a single elongated ray. And another, a crescent moon cradling a single fallen star. This wasn't random. This was a sequence, a deliberate chain of esoteric symbols, painstakingly hidden within the innocuous floral border. A coded message. My archival training, my passion for unraveling the past, surged. This was the thrill I lived for, the quiet hunt for meaning amidst the mundane. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled a fresh sheet of paper and began to meticulously sketch each symbol, noting its position, its relationship to the others. The sequence continued, a silent conversation across 5 centuries. After the moon and star, a jagged mountain peak, then a coiled serpent, then a single solitary eye. And finally, at the very bottom of the page, where the border met the signature of a long-dead bishop, a series of numbers, written in an almost microscopic hand, disguised as decorative flourishes, 34, 17N, 116, 32W. Below that, almost swallowed by a blotch of faded ink, the phrase, Beneath the dust, the falcons keep. My mind raced, connecting the fragments, coordinates, a location, and a cryptic phrase. Beneath the dust, the falcons keep. A desert landscape bloomed in my mind's eye, dry and vast. And falcons keep. Was that the desert safe house with buried cash? The very words resonated with a strange, compelling power. The implications struck me with the force of a sudden gale. This wasn't merely a historical footnote. This was a secret, hidden for centuries, suggesting not just a location, but perhaps a repository. A treasure, even. My gaze fell to the piles of bills stacked precariously on my small desk at home, the stark reality of my existence. A treasure. The word hummed with a dangerous allure. Woven into the very last decorative vine, almost swallowed by the page's edge, was one more symbol. A small, almost invisible, interlocking double helix. Not the symbol of science, but a stylized, ancient representation of interconnectedness, of lineage, of a powerful, secret society. My heart, which had just begun to soar with the possibility of financial salvation, now plunged, a cold stone in my chest. This wasn't just old parchment and faded ink. This was a living secret, a dormant leviathan stirring from its long slumber. I had merely sought to categorize, to preserve. Instead, I had stumbled upon a silent invitation, or perhaps a terrible summons. The quiet hum of the archives suddenly felt less comforting, more like the ominous thrumming of a hidden engine just beginning to awaken. My quiet life, I realized with a growing unease, might have just ended. The air in my small flat, usually a sanctuary of quiet scholarly dust and parchment, now hummed with a different kind of static. Not the gentle hum of aging electronics, but the frantic pulse of my own thoughts, echoing the insistent thrum of unpaid bills stacked like miniature monuments to my failing solvency. My fingers, accustomed to the delicate dance across brittle vellum, now tapped a restless rhythm on the desk. The rhythmic click-clack, a counterpoint to the revelation burning bright in my mind. Beneath the dust, the falcons keep. That phrase, a whisper from centuries past, had coalesced with the coordinates, painting a vivid tableau in my mind, a desert safe house with buried cash, shimmering under an imagined sun, its secrets waiting. The image was a mirage, yet tantalizingly real, promising escape from the tightening noose of my financial reality. My archival work, once a pure pursuit of knowledge, now felt like a gilded cage. The world outside my window, a tapestry of gray cityscapes, seemed to mock my scholarly detachment. I needed more than just understanding, I needed action. The decision, when it finally solidified, felt less like a choice and more like an inevitability, a desperate gamble against the encroaching shadows. I would leverage this fragment of forgotten history, not for academic renown, but for survival. But how? I spent a day, then another, meticulously crafting my approach. My hands, usually stained with ink and age, now flew across a keyboard, constructing an anonymous email. It was a digital ghost, routed through layers of anonymizing proxies, addressed to a name whispered in hushed tones among certain circles, a private historian, known for his esoteric knowledge of obscure cults and forgotten desert civilizations. My message was a riddle, a piece of a puzzle, carefully stripped of any direct identifiers, potent enough, I hoped, to pique his unique interest. Regarding an artifact, I wrote, my fingers hovering over the send button, bearing a motif reminiscent of the winged serpent iconography often associated with the Brotherhood of the Sands, seeking verification of its historical context and potential value. Perhaps its connection to sites such as a desert safe house with buried cash mentioned in obscure texts. I deliberately used a slightly different, less precise name for the society, couched the desert safe house with buried cash as a known historical reference, not a direct clue from my document, a thread, not a rope, a spark, not a bonfire. My heart hammered against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate for flight. Each passing hour felt like a century. Had I been too vague, too obvious? Had the message simply vanished into the ether? The tension in my shoulders grew, a physical manifestation of my anxiety. Then 3 days later, a reply. It was brief, almost curt. Intriguing, provide further details if authentic. A colleague may be able to assist. No name, no pleasantries, a flicker of hope, fragile as old paper, ignited within me. It was a step, a small, tentative step, but a step nonetheless. I drafted a follow-up, equally circumspect, offering to share a coded image of a less significant symbol from the document, a symbolic gesture of good faith. The second reply came faster, within hours. Meet at the old dock warehouse midnight, alone, the old dock warehouse. Not a cafe, not a library, not even an anonymous park bench. A derelict industrial space, far from prying eyes, steeped in the scent of brine and decay. This wasn't the discreet academic consultation I had envisioned. This was clandestine. This was dangerous. I tried to rationalize it. My archivist's mind, trained to spot anomalies, now screamed. That evening, as dusk bled into night, I prepared, not for a meeting but for an ordeal. I copied the coded image onto an encrypted drive, tucked it deep into my coat. My quiet flat, usually a haven, now felt like a cage, its walls suddenly too thin. My carefully constructed anonymity, I realized with a jolt that went deeper than fear, had been a flimsy veil. My harmless outreach hadn't just reached a private historian. It had intersected with something vast, something watchful. This wasn't a casual inquiry. The criminal faction, the very entity that had been secretly monitoring this specific historical line, had been alerted. They hadn't just found my message. They had been waiting for a message like mine. My desperate bid for financial relief had not merely opened a door. It had thrown open a floodgate. My quiet life, the one I had meticulously built brick by scholarly brick, was irrevocably shattered. I was no longer an observer. I was now a player in a game I didn't understand, a pawn on a board far larger and deadlier than I could have ever imagined. The cold wind carried the scent of rain and distant metal, a prelude to the storm gathering around me. The chill of the dark warehouse had not been the last of my discomfort. The brine-scented air was merely a prelude to a deeper, more profound sense of disorientation. One moment, the creaking timbers and the oily sheen of the water below; the next, a suffocating blackness. A rough hand had clamped over my mouth, another pressed against my back, guiding me, or rather, propelling me, into a waiting vehicle. The world dissolved into the rhythmic drone of an engine and the unsettling sensation of being driven far, far away. My mind, usually a sanctuary of order, scrambled for purchase, for a logical sequence of events, but found only fragmented fear. When the blindfold was finally peeled away, my eyes, accustomed to the deep night within the vehicle, squinted against a harsh, relentless glare. The air, thin and dry, tasted of dust and distant heat. We were no longer by the sea. Before me stretched an expanse of ochre and rust, a landscape sculpted by millennia of wind and sun. The sky, an audacious, uncompromising blue, pressed down on a lone structure, squat and unyielding, blending almost seamlessly into the parched earth. This was the desert safe house with buried cash. A shiver, not of cold but of stark realization, traced its path along my spine. Inside, the silence was absolute, broken only by the rasp of my own breath. The interior was Spartan, functional. A long, unvarnished table dominated the main room, flanked by metal chairs. The air was cool, almost sterile, a stark contrast to the oven outside. They were not men of gentle inquiry, I sensed. Their posture, their stillness, spoke of a coiled readiness. UserCZ, one of them spoke, his voice a low thrum that seemed to vibrate through the very floorboards. But the words caught in my throat, tangled with the fear that had begun to solidify in my gut. The other figure stepped forward, a tall, lean individual whose gaze was unnervingly direct. He placed a folder on the table, sliding it towards me with a deliberate slowness. For this, I didn't need to open it. The faint scent of old paper, the familiar weight of the vellum, confirmed my suspicion. It was the document, the one I had painstakingly begun to decipher, the one that had promised escape from my financial woes, but the promise now felt like a curse. I've shown a remarkable aptitude, UserCZ, the first man continued, his voice devoid of inflection, a gift for uncovering what others have deliberately obscured. We find that valuable. I merely interpret historical texts, I retorted, trying to inject a semblance of academic detachment into my voice, despite the frantic beat of my pulse. The lean man offered a slow, almost imperceptible smile. Indeed, but some texts hold more than just history, they hold power, and I have a key. He leaned forward, his eyes locking onto mine. A key we now require I to use fully and without reservation. He began to speak, not about the document, but about me. He knew of my mounting debts, the overdue bills that piled on my kitchen counter like silent accusations. He spoke of the failing health of my elderly parent, the increasing cost of their care, the fragile hope I clung to that this treasure would be my salvation. He even mentioned the specific brand of Earl Grey tea I favored, a mundane detail that felt like a monstrous invasion, stripping away my last vestiges of privacy. It was a calculated assault, each detail a hammer blow against my carefully constructed facade of independence. "We are not asking, UserCZ," the first man stated, his voice now sharper, cutting through the thin air. "We are informing I will complete my work. I will decipher every last symbol, every hidden meaning, every layered cipher within that document, and I will do it for us." My jaw tightened. The thought of refusing, of clinging to some shred of moral high ground, warred with the stark reality of their knowledge, their reach. They knew my vulnerabilities, my anchors to this world. The lean man picked up the document, his fingers tracing the ancient script, the very lines I had pored over for months. "I believe it's a treasure map, UserCZ, gold, jewels, perhaps a forgotten cache of coinage." He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. How quaint, how delightfully mundane. He opened the document to a page I had struggled with for weeks, a complex array of symbols that seemed to defy any known linguistic or mathematical system. "This," he said, pointing to a particularly ornate glyph, "is not a direction to a buried chest. This is a formula, not for wealth, but for something far more profound, something that can reshape the very fabric of influence. Control." My breath hitched. My mind, ever the archivist, raced through possibilities, not gold but a secret, not jewels but leverage. The pieces, once scattered and seemingly disparate, began to coalesce into a terrifying mosaic. The centuries-old society, the hidden messages, the cryptic allusions to the true power. It wasn't about material gain. It was about something far grander, far more dangerous. "The treasure," he continued, his voice dropping to an almost conspiratorial tone, "is not a thing I can hold in my hand, UserCZ. The document I hold is not a map to a vault, but a blueprint to manipulate the world itself. And I," he concluded, fixing me with an unwavering stare, "are going to help us unlock it." The air grew heavy with the weight of his words. The treasure I had hoped would save me from ruin was, in fact, the key to an unimaginable power, a power these individuals clearly intended to wield. My heart hammered, not with fear alone, but with a terrifying clarity. My intellectual curiosity, my harmless pursuit of forgotten knowledge, had unwittingly entangled me in a conspiracy that stretched beyond mere money, beyond simple crime. This was about control, absolute and ancient, and I, UserCZ, was now a reluctant, terrified instrument in its unveiling. The desert safe house with buried cash, I realized, was not just a place of confinement, but a crucible where my quiet life would be forged anew, into something I could barely yet comprehend. The air grew heavy with the weight of his words. My intellectual curiosity, my life's quiet pursuit of forgotten truths, had become a snare, pulling me into a current far too swift and dark. "I understand then," the network's leader had stated, his voice a low rumble devoid of any genuine warmth, "that my unique talents are now indispensable." He had watched me, his gaze like a predator assessing its prey, not for weakness, but for utility. My protests, choked by a sudden, profound dread, had withered on my lips. There was no negotiation, only assimilation. No excuses, your knowledge is required. My role, they explained, was to unlock a specific secure vault, not through brute force, but through an understanding of its antique mechanisms, a system of interlocking tumblers and coded sequences that had once protected a nobleman's prized collection. The irony was a bitter taste. My skills, honed over decades to preserve history, were now to be used to plunder it. Each breath felt stolen, each beat of my pulse a drum of impending doom. I saw the faces of my ancestors, the quiet scholars, the diligent scribes, their spectral eyes filled with a disappointment that cut deeper than any threat. I was to become a thief, a desecrator of the very past I revered. The moral compromise was a gaping wound in my soul, bleeding away the last vestiges of my former self. Yet, the alternative, unspoken but palpable, was annihilation. Survival, I rationalized with a tremor, was its own grim form of integrity. The vehicle was heavy, armored, and the air within it thick with unspoken intent. Beside me, a silent operative, his face a mask of practiced neutrality, checked a series of specialized tools, their glinting surfaces alien and menacing in the dim light. I clutched a worn leather satchel, inside which lay my own instruments, a set of delicate probes, an endoscope, and a magnifying loupe, tools of meticulous study now repurposed for transgression. The network's leader, accompanied by several other silent figures, moved with an unsettling efficiency. My instructions were precise: disable the primary locking mechanism of a specific vault door on the second floor. No alarms, the leader had cautioned, his voice a low hiss. No trace. We need what's inside, and we need it clean. Inside, the silence was profound, broken only by the soft brush of our footsteps on ancient floorboards. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of aged paper and dust, a scent that usually brought me comfort, now only heightened my anxiety. The vault door, when I finally stood before it, was a formidable beast of wrought iron and polished brass, its surface etched with intricate, swirling patterns that spoke of an earlier century's artistry. My fingers, usually steady as they turned the pages of fragile manuscripts, trembled slightly as I examined the mechanism. "This is a sovereign's more design," I murmured, my voice sounding unnaturally loud in the hushed space. "A true masterpiece of its era. The internal mechanism uses a series of weighted levers and a pressure-sensitive trigger, combined with a 4-digit rotational sequence, not a standard combination lock." The operative beside me grunted, a sound of impatience. My probes, extensions of my own nervous system, danced across the cold metal, seeking the minute vibrations, the subtle clicks, the almost imperceptible shifts in pressure that would betray the vault's secrets. Each turn of the dial, each gentle nudge of a lever, was a silent prayer, a desperate plea for speed and precision. Hours seemed to compress into minutes as I meticulously mapped the internal geometry, my mind racing through historical schematics, recalling forgotten patents, piecing together the architect's cunning design. Then, a soft, resonant thunk. The heavy bolts retracted with a sigh of displaced air. The vault door, once an impenetrable barrier, now stood ajar. A wave of both relief and profound despair washed over me. I had done it. I had breached the sanctity of a historical artifact, a guardian of secrets. Inside, the vault was not filled with gold or jewels, but with an array of meticulously organized documents, ornate boxes, and a single, pedestal-mounted artifact shrouded in velvet. The leader moved directly to it, pulling back the cloth with a flourish that was almost theatrical. What lay beneath was a relic of polished obsidian, intricately carved with symbols that mirrored those I had found in the coded message. But here, they seemed to throb with a latent energy. It was a fragment, clearly, of something larger, something ancient and powerful. This was the puzzle piece. As the leader carefully secured the obsidian fragment in a reinforced case, one of the other operatives, a hulking figure with eyes like chips of flint, moved towards a smaller, less ornate wooden chest tucked away in a corner. With a swift, brutal kick, he splintered the lock, revealing a cache of old coins and a few tarnished silver ingots. "Loose ends," he grunted, scooping them into a bag. "No one needs to know everything was taken." My stomach clenched. They weren't just after a specific historical artifact. They were predators, taking what they pleased, leaving a trail of calculated chaos. This was the reveal. Their ruthlessness wasn't just about their grand scheme, but a core tenet of their existence. My initial, naive hope of merely being a temporary, useful tool shattered. I was now complicit, my hands stained by their actions, my future inextricably bound to their dangerous enterprise. The return journey was even more silent, the obsidian piece now secured somewhere in the vehicle. My mind reeled. I had broken the law. I had betrayed my own principles. The weight of it pressed down on me, suffocating. We eventually arrived at a remote, unassuming structure, barely visible against the vast, desolate landscape, the desert safe house with buried cash. As I stepped out into the biting desert wind, the sheer isolation of our new location amplified my predicament. There was no escape here, no easy path back to the quiet life I had so carelessly abandoned. I was trapped, a pawn in a game I barely understood, my unique skills now a double-edged sword. The obsidian fragment, the puzzle piece, felt like a brand upon my soul. I had helped them acquire it, and in doing so, had buried myself deeper than any treasure could ever be hidden. The only way out, I realized with a grim resolve, was through. I would have to understand this power, this society from within, if I was to ever hope to reclaim my life, or perhaps simply survive. The desert wind, a persistent whisper of grit and heat, clawed at the walls of the desert safe house with buried cash. Days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting angles of harsh sunlight and the taste of dust on my tongue. I was here in this desolate expanse, a pawn in a game I barely understood. My meticulous mind now focused on survival as much as deciphering the ancient script. My quiet life felt like a dream from another age, utterly divorced from the stark reality of this place. The others, the leader, a man whose eyes held the cold gleam of ambition, and his two enforcers, silent and watchful, had me poring over a series of old maps, their parchment brittle beneath my trembling fingers. They believed I was simply confirming coordinates for the buried cache. But my archivist's instinct, honed over decades of quiet study, was a restless current beneath the surface. I noticed the faint, almost imperceptible discoloration on one map, a subtle overlay not present on the others. It was a ghost of a revision, expertly erased, but not entirely. While the enforcers were distracted with a crackling radio transmission outside, their voices low and guttural, I used the edge of a broken nail, a tool of desperate necessity, to gently scrape at the anomaly. A tiny fleck of newer pigment flaked away, revealing a subtle shift in the original lines. The coordinates were not identical. The difference was fractional, almost negligible to the untrained eye, but to me it screamed of deliberate alteration. Someone had intended to mislead, someone within this very network. My stomach twisted, a knot of ice forming where hunger usually resided. This wasn't merely a treasure hunt anymore. It was a labyrinth of deceit. My gaze drifted to the leader, who was at a makeshift table, cleaning a small, ornate pistol with an almost tender care. He hummed a tuneless melody, his back to me. His composure, once a mask of authority, now seemed like a fragile veneer over something far more insidious. Later, under the guise of needing better light, I moved closer to the leader's personal effects, a small canvas bag he kept meticulously organized. A glint of metal caught my eye. Tucked beneath a spare comms unit, almost swallowed by the rough fabric, lay a small, folded note. My fingers, practiced in the delicate handling of ancient manuscripts, plucked it free. It was not old parchment but modern paper, crisp and new, not retrieval, not acquisition. Extraction. The word echoed with a different intent, a finality that spoke not of shared success, but of disposal. My mind raced, connecting the altered map to this cryptic note. They intended to find the cache, yes, but then, what of me? The coordinates on the altered map would lead me to a different, empty spot, while they, armed with the true location, would claim the prize and leave me stranded. A disposable key, no longer needed once the lock was turned. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was not a partner, not an asset to be valued, but a tool to be discarded. The leader's smooth promises, his calculated encouragement, were nothing but sugar-coated poison. But the betrayal, sharp as it was not the only revelation that day. As I meticulously cross-referenced the altered map with the original, my eyes fell upon a series of marginalia I had previously dismissed as irrelevant arcane symbols. Now, armed with the knowledge of deceit, I scrutinized them anew. They weren't mere decorative flourishes. They were a secondary code, a layer of protection woven into the primary message, likely by the original creators to warn against precisely this kind of treachery. My heart hammered a frantic rhythm against my ribs as I began to unravel it. It spoke not of gold nor jewels, but of something far more profound and terrifying. The treasure wasn't wealth to be hoarded, but a devastating apparatus for manipulating information, for rewriting history, for shaping the very fabric of belief on a global scale. It was a key to unparalleled power, capable of dissolving truth and manufacturing consent, a destructive potential that dwarfed any material fortune. It was a mechanism to orchestrate chaos, to unravel the delicate tapestry of civilization itself. A shiver, not of fear but of righteous fury, coursed through me. This wasn't just about my life anymore. This was about something far greater. This artifact, this destructive secret, could not fall into the hands of someone like the leader or anyone else who sought to wield such power for personal gain. It was too dangerous, too corrupting. My quiet archivist's soul, once content with preserving the past, now felt a spark ignite within it, a fierce, defiant ember. I had been a pawn, yes, but a pawn who now understood the game and the true stakes. My intellectual skills, once a source of quiet pride, now became weapons. I would not be discarded. I would not allow this destructive secret to be unleashed. The betrayal had not broken me. It had forged a resolve I never knew I possessed. I would fight back. I would protect this secret, not for them, but from them. The desert, once a symbol of my entrapment, now seemed to stretch out before me, a canvas for a desperate, dangerous plan. The desert wind, a rasping whisper, was my only companion inside the desert safe house with buried cash. Dust, fine as powdered bone, coated every surface, a testament to long neglect. My breath still hitched, catching on the phantom echo of extraction, a word that had coiled itself around my heart, squeezing the last drops of naive hope. They hadn't merely sought to retrieve, to understand. They had sought to dispose. Me, and perhaps the very truth I now clutched like a broken shard in my mind. The safe house was a relic itself. Concrete blocks scarred by sandstorms, a single reinforced door, and windows shuttered tight against the sun's relentless gaze. I had stumbled upon it, a ghost of a memory from an old, forgotten document, a place marked not on any map, but encoded in a series of historical land grants. It was a haven of last resort, and the last resort it had become. My fingers, still trembling from the escape, traced the rough concrete walls. Searching, the hidden cache, I reasoned, would not be obvious. My archival instincts, honed by years of sifting through centuries of deliberate obfuscation, guided me. It was not about brute force, but about understanding the intent of the one who had hidden it. A subtle discoloration in the floor, a faint irregularity in the texture of the wall, these were the whispers I sought. Beneath a loose floorboard, concealed by a layer of hardened sand, I found it. Not gold, not weapons, but a small, waterproof trunk. Inside lay a collection of archaic yet functional tools, a satellite phone, its battery surprisingly charged, a compact, solar-powered laptop, its screen a dull gray, and most importantly, a sheaf of documents, brittle with age but meticulously preserved. These were not the network's records, but something far older, fragments of original charters, correspondence, and ledgers from the very society I was now entangled with. Someone, long ago, had kept a counter-archive. My world, for weeks, shrank to the confines of that dusty room. The sun rose and set, painting the sky in fiery hues I only glimpsed through cracks in the shutters, but my gaze remained fixed on the glowing screen, on the faded ink. I cross-referenced dates, analyzed linguistic shifts, and tracked the provenance of forgotten symbols. The first revelation came not as a sudden flash, but as a slow, creeping dawn. The treasure was not a physical hoard of riches, as I had initially believed, nor even a single powerful device. It was an archive, a foundational ledger of the society itself, meticulously detailing their true purpose, not global domination in the crude sense, but the subtle, generational manipulation of information. They didn't seek to control nations through brute force, but to shape the very narrative of history, seeding discord, guiding scientific discovery, and subtly influencing cultural shifts over centuries. The artifact was a master key to their entire operation, a chronological record of their interventions, a blueprint for future endeavors. Its retrieval was not about wealth, but about maintaining absolute, unseen control over the flow of knowledge itself. Extraction, then, meant not just taking the ledger, but also silencing anyone who had glimpsed its true nature. My fingers flew across the laptop's ancient keyboard, inputting the data, building a mosaic of their intricate web. I noticed patterns, not just in their historical operations, but in their current organizational structure. Their strength was their secrecy, their reliance on a hierarchical, compartmentalized system. But this very strength was also their most profound vulnerability. The historical documents revealed a deep schism, a philosophical rift that had simmered for centuries, occasionally erupting into quiet, internal purges. The network was not monolithic. It had factions, each clinging to a slightly different interpretation of the society's ancient tenets. This internal discord, buried deep beneath layers of enforced loyalty, was a fault line I could exploit. The satellite phone hummed, a low vibration against the rough wood of the table. I had found a coded reference in one of the old letters, a series of seemingly random numbers hidden within a discussion of agricultural yields. It was an emergency contact, dating back decades, but its structure suggested it might still be monitored by those who, like me, questioned the society's absolute authority. My finger hovered. This was the moment of the gambit, the move that would either seal my fate or offer a sliver of hope. I sent a short, encrypted burst. A string of symbols derived from the ancient cipher I had just cracked, a message only someone deeply immersed in the original texts would recognize. It spoke of the ledger and the ancient schism, just enough to pique curiosity, to suggest I held knowledge they coveted or feared. Hours later, the phone vibrated again. A single encrypted text. Provenance? It asked. My breath caught. A test. I typed back a specific reference to a rarely cited historical decree, a document I had found in the cache that detailed the specific philosophical divergence. A call came through. The voice was low, cautious, tinged with an academic weariness. "You understand what you're dabbling in?" The caller, a historian by their tone, asked, no greeting offered. "They've been hunting these fragments for decades. And you've been collecting them," I countered, my own voice surprisingly steady. "The counter-archive, the true history. I have the ledger's true purpose. And I see the cracks in their edifice. The internal contradictions, the old arguments still simmering. A long silence stretched between us, filled only by the static of the satellite connection and the insistent hum of the desert wind. An archivist, the historian finally murmured, a hint of grudging respect in their voice. "I always suspected someone like you might emerge, someone who could see past the curated facade." They spoke of their own attempts to piece together the truth, their isolation, their fear. They don't want history, only their version of it. "Then we have a shared interest," the historian conceded, their tone hardening with a resolve that mirrored my own. "A fragile alliance born of necessity. What do I propose, UserCZ?" My mind, sharp and focused, already began to spin scenarios, to weave a counter-narrative from the threads of their own deception. The desert safe house, once a tomb of fear, now felt like a crucible for a dangerous, desperate plan. The game had changed, and I, the archivist, was finally ready to play. The desert wind, a relentless sculptor of dunes and silence, tasted of ancient dust and a burgeoning resolve. My palms, still gritty from the journey, pressed into the warm earth, a silent pact with the hidden secrets beneath. The desert safe house with buried cache stood stark against the bruised canvas of dawn, its corrugated metal walls shimmering with residual heat. The driver, a man of few words but steady hands, moved with practiced efficiency beside me, his shovel biting into the hardpan with a rhythmic scrape. My own tool felt foreign, an extension of a desperate will, not the delicate instruments of my archival trade. "Here," I murmured, pointing to a subtle depression in the ground, a phantom scar that only a meticulous eye, trained on centuries-old maps and faint cartographic anomalies, could discern. The leader, in their arrogant certainty, had missed this. Their network, efficient in its brutality, had overlooked the quiet language of the land itself. My fingers, usually tracing brittle parchment, now sought the subtle shifts in soil density, the faint echo of disturbed earth. Each scoop of sand, each clatter of rock, was a step deeper into the unknown, a gamble with my very existence. The sun climbed, a molten disk in the sky, beating down with an intensity that promised no quarter. Sweat beaded on my brow, blurring my vision, but my focus remained absolute. The coded message, the whispers of the society, coalesced into this single burning point. We dug, a tandem rhythm of effort and anticipation, until the shovel struck something solid. Not rock, but a resonant thud that vibrated up the shaft and into my bones. "Careful," I instructed, my voice hoarse, a dry rasp against the wind. I knelt, pushing aside the last layers of sand with my bare hands. Beneath lay a crude, iron-bound chest, its surface pitted and rusted, but undeniably present. The event had begun. My breath hitched. This was it. The driver pried open the corroded latches with a grunt, the metal protesting with a shriek that seemed to tear the quiet air. It was intricate, a clockwork dream, unlike anything I had ever seen. Its form suggested purpose. Its stillness hummed with latent power. This was the reveal. This was not a treasure to be spent, but a system to be activated, a key to an influence far more pervasive than mere coin. The society hadn't hoarded wealth, they had orchestrated control. A glint of metal caught my eye from the perimeter of the safe house. A vehicle, dust-caked and menacing, was pulling to a stop. The leader, predictable. They had underestimated my ability to decipher, to follow the breadcrumbs of history, but not my ultimate location. This was the crucible. "They're here," the driver stated, his hand already moving towards the tool belt at his waist. "Let them come," I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. I lifted the artifact from its dusty cradle. It was heavier than it looked, radiating a faint, almost imperceptible warmth. Its surfaces were etched with symbols, a language I now understood. A schematic for a network far grander and more insidious than any single vault of riches. The leader emerged, a silhouette of grim intent against the blazing sun, flanked by two enforcers. Their eyes, sharp and predatory, fixed on the bronze and crystal device in my hands. "UserCZ," the leader's voice sliced through the air, devoid of its usual cultivated charm, a surprising resilience. "Hand over what you've found." I met their gaze, a defiant spark in my own. "You misunderstand its nature," I said, my voice resonating with a new authority. "You seek a treasure, but this is not a static hoard. This is the central nexus, the living heart of their design." The leader took a step closer, their face hardening. "Spare me your archivist's poetic pronouncements. It is a key, a device to unlock the society's true legacy, and it will be mine." "Indeed," I countered, a dangerous smile playing on my lips. "A key, but to what?" "You believe it opens a vault of gold. I understand it opens a network of influence, a historical tapestry woven with threads of information, manipulated and controlled for centuries. A system you intend to corrupt, to use for blunt, modern-day power." One of the enforcers moved, a blur of motion, but the driver intercepted him with a sudden, forceful shove that sent him stumbling. The leader's eyes narrowed, a flicker of genuine surprise crossing their face. "You've miscalculated," I continued, holding the device aloft. "This artifact, this key, is useless to you without the true understanding of its architecture. You see a mechanism, I see a philosophy, and I have already begun to disseminate that philosophy. The entire structure, the very foundation of their centuries-old secrecy, is now vulnerable. If I fall, if this device is misused, the entire network unravels, exposed to the light." They had believed this was about ownership, about physical possession. They had not anticipated a threat to the integrity of the secret itself. My words were a poisoned dart, striking at the heart of their ambition. Their goal wasn't just to gain power, but to do so undetected, leveraging the society's ancient, hidden structure. "I bluff," the leader spat, but the uncertainty in their eyes was a tell. "Do I?" I challenged, my gaze unflinching. "This device, it's a master switch, a master archive. It doesn't just point to information, it controls it. And I, the humble archivist, have learned enough to initiate its self-destruction protocol, or more accurately, its self-disclosure protocol. A final failsafe against those who would exploit it for crude power, rather than preserve its delicate balance." I made a show of pressing a subtle indentation on the device, a gesture I hoped looked convincing. The enforcers hesitated, glancing at their leader. The stakes had shifted. This wasn't about simply taking an object, it was about preventing a catastrophic exposure. The leader's plans, their carefully constructed future, hung by a thread. The confrontation had turned from a physical struggle to a battle of intellect, a testament to the true power of knowledge. "Step away," I commanded, my voice ringing with a newfound authority, an archivist no longer cowering, wielding the very secrets they had sought to control. "Or watch my hidden empire crumble into dust." The desert wind, a silent accomplice, carried my words, sealing the promise of unearthing not just a buried cache, a dangerous, undeniable truth. The game indeed had taken a drastic turn. The leaders, stripped of their veneer of control, writhed in the unseen chains of my words. Their face, a mask of cold authority moments before, cracked, revealing a raw, wounded fury. "I understand nothing," they hissed, a venomous whisper that barely disturbed the dust motes dancing in the faint light filtering through the grimy windows of the desert safehouse with buried cash. But I knew, with the chilling clarity of a sudden winter dawn, that I understood everything. My initial, desperate gamble to leverage a centuries-old secret for financial relief had spiraled into this desolate endgame, far from the quiet solitude of my archives. The immediate threat was neutralized. The leader, along with their remaining enforcer, lay bound, their struggles futile against the ropes I had meticulously tested. My hands, once accustomed to the delicate rustle of ancient parchment, now bore the faint abrasions of struggle, a testament to this brutal awakening. The air, thick with the metallic tang of fear and the lingering scent of stale sweat, pressed in on me, a heavy shroud. My gaze drifted to the precise spot on the cracked concrete floor where the leader had pointed, where the earth beneath held its breath. The buried cache. My archivist's instinct, honed over years of deciphering faded scripts and obscure symbols, now guided my calloused fingers. The tools I had appropriated, a small pick, a sturdy shovel, felt surprisingly natural in my grip. Each strike against the hardened earth echoed in the confined space, a rhythmic testament to the unraveling of a long-held secret. Dust-plumed, catching the weak light, a shimmering curtain between my past and the precipice of my future. My heart, a relentless drum against my ribs, quickened not with greed, but with a profound, almost reverent anticipation. This was the true treasure, the core of the leader's ambition, the very integrity of the secret society they sought to control. With a grunt of effort, I pried open the lid. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was not a single artifact, but a collection. A series of lead tablets, etched with symbols that mirrored those in the coded message I had first uncovered, but far more intricate, more expansive. There were also several tightly rolled scrolls, their parchment brittle with age, and a small, heavy locket, intricately carved with the same recurring motif, a stylized serpent devouring its own tail, the Ouroboros, symbol of eternal return, of cyclical power. But the most striking discovery, the true reveal, lay beneath these, a single thin folio, bound in what felt like human skin, inscribed with a precise genealogical record. It wasn't a family tree of kings or conquerors, but a lineage of keepers, names stretching back millennia, each marked with a symbol indicating a specific role, a guardian of the knowledge. The society wasn't merely seeking wealth or influence. They were the descendants of these keepers, their ambition rooted in a perceived birthright to inherit and control this ancient foundational truth. The coded message wasn't just a map to a treasure, it was a key to their very identity, a test for those deemed worthy, or perhaps a trap for those who weren't. The leader's fury had stemmed from my accidental exposure of their claim to this heritage, not just the physical cache. I carefully, almost tenderly, resecured the cache. I couldn't destroy this lineage, this testament to humanity's enduring quest for power and meaning, but neither could I allow it to fall into hands that would wield its secrets as a weapon. The original coded document, the one that had been my undoing and my salvation, I placed within the sarcophagus as well, sealing its fate alongside its brethren. I then buried the wooden box once more, meticulously restoring the earth, erasing every trace, ensuring its slumber would be undisturbed. My hands, still gritty with earth, trembled slightly, but it was not from fear. It was the tremor of a spirit irrevocably altered. That person had died somewhere between the ambush and the grim resolve in this desolate outpost. I could not return to my old life, to the comforting illusion of scholarly detachment. The knowledge I now possessed, the violence I had witnessed and enacted, the profound understanding of the depths to which ambition could plunge, these were indelible marks. This was the key event, the crystallization of my new purpose. I would not become a pawn in their game, nor would I simply disappear. I would become an observer, a quiet force, using the very skills that had led me into this labyrinth to understand its full extent. I would expose the true nature of the conspiracy, not with a bang, but with the meticulous, patient unraveling of threads. One by one, my integrity, though scarred, remained intact, a compass in this treacherous new terrain. I took one last look at the bound figures, their breathing shallow, their dreams of ancient power now dust. The vast, indifferent expanse of sand stretched before me, a blank canvas upon which I would now paint a new, uncertain future.